My ex of 6 years claimed she lost feelings and wanted to be friends, then I checked her laptop right before moving out. For 6 years I genuinely believed I had found the person I was going to grow old with. We met when we were both still trying to figure out who we were, stumbling through our early 20s with more dreams than money. We built everything together from scratch. We celebrated birthdays in tiny apartments with cheap decorations, survived months where instant noodles became dinner 4 nights a week, and promised each other that one day we'd look back and laugh at how difficult life used to be. Every promotion, every setback, every family gathering, every holiday, we experienced it side by side. When people asked about marriage, we would just smile and say, it's only a matter of time. There wasn't a single part of my future that didn't include her. She wasn't just my girlfriend anymore, she was my routine, my comfort, my best friend, and the person I trusted more than anyone else on this planet. Looking back now, I realize the warning signs didn't appear overnight. They crept into our relationship so slowly that I convinced myself nothing was wrong. She stopped laughing at my stupid jokes. The little hugs she'd randomly give me while I cooked dinner disappeared. Our conversations became shorter, and whenever I asked if something was bothering her, she'd simply shrug and blame work stress or say she was tired. I believed every excuse because that's what people in love do, they choose trust over suspicion. I kept telling myself relationships naturally change after several years together. Not every day could feel like the honeymoon phase, right? I thought we were simply entering a more mature stage of our relationship. I had absolutely no idea I was the only one still trying to hold on to what we had. Then came the conversation that completely shattered everything I thought I knew. She asked if we could sit down after dinner because she needed to talk. Those 4 words instantly made my stomach tight. The way she avoided eye contact told me this wasn't going to be a normal conversation. After what felt like several minutes of awkward silence, she quietly said, I think I've lost feelings. I remember blinking because my brain genuinely couldn't process those words. Lost feelings? After 6 years, I asked her if we could work through it, if we could try therapy, take a vacation together, spend more quality time together, anything. But she just shook her head slowly. Then she added something that somehow hurt even more. She said she still cared about me deeply and hoped we could stay friends because I was too important to lose completely. Friends. After 6 years of building a life together, she wanted us to become friends. I wish I could tell you I handled it with dignity, but the truth is I felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped my heart out with their bare hands. I wasn't angry, I wasn't yelling, I was just numb. Every memory we had together replayed in my head while she calmly explained that sometimes people simply grow apart. She insisted there wasn't another guy involved. She even promised me that this wasn't about cheating or someone else. According to her, the relationship had simply run its course. She repeated that phrase several times as if rehearsing it beforehand. I wanted to believe her because accepting that explanation hurt far less than imagining someone else had taken my place. So I nodded, agreed to move out by the end of the week, and told myself that maybe life just wasn't fair sometimes. The following days were some of the most emotionally exhausting days of my life. Packing 6 years into cardboard boxes is a cruel experience I wouldn't wish on anyone. Every drawer contained another memory. Old movie tickets, birthday cards, vacation photos, random little souvenirs we'd collected during road trips. I kept finding pieces of a relationship that apparently meant nothing anymore. She remained surprisingly calm the entire time. She even offered to help me pack some of my things, but I politely declined because I couldn't bear pretending everything was okay. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered how someone could go from saying I love you forever to acting like they were helping a roommate move out. The night before I was supposed to leave, she told me she was meeting one of her coworkers for dinner to clear her head. Again, I didn't think much of it. Why would I? She had looked me straight in the eyes and promised there wasn't anyone else. After she left, I continued packing the last few boxes in what used to be our shared office. That's when I noticed her laptop sitting on the desk. Normally it was always with her, but she'd apparently forgotten it in a rush. The screen lit up when I accidentally bumped the mouse. There was no password, just her desktop, and dozens of open browser tabs she must have forgot to close. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. Every part of me knew I should simply close the laptop and continue packing. We were already over. Whatever was on that computer technically wasn't my business anymore. But another part of me, the part that couldn't stop replaying her promise that there wasn't another man, increasingly wondered if I had been lied to. My hand hovered over the trackpad as my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I kept telling myself, if she's telling the truth, you'll only feel guilty for invading her privacy. But if she wasn't telling the truth, then maybe the last 6 years deserved at least one honest answer. With one deep breath, I clicked the first open tab, and within seconds my entire understanding of our relationship collapsed. The first thing I saw wasn't even a message. It was a hotel reservation confirmation. 2 nights at a boutique hotel just outside the city. The check-in date was exactly 3 weeks before she told me she'd lost feelings. At first, I convinced myself there had to be some innocent explanation. Maybe it was a work conference. Maybe she had booked it for a friend. My brain desperately searched for any possibility that didn't end with betrayal. But then I noticed the reservation was for 2 adults, and under the special requests section was a note that read, "Celebrating our first weekend away together." My stomach dropped so violently I thought I was going to throw up. My hands started shaking so badly that I nearly closed the laptop by accident. I sat there frozen, unable to breathe properly, staring at the screen as if the words might somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating. They never did. Instead, I clicked over to another tab that had been left open. It was her personal email. Right near the top of her inbox was a thread with a name I recognized instantly. It belonged to one of the guys from her office, the same coworker she'd casually mentioned countless times over the past year. The same guy she always insisted was just a friend. Every time I had jokingly teased her about how often his name came up, she'd roll her eyes and tell me I was being ridiculous. Reading those emails, I realized I hadn't been ridiculous at all. I'd been naive. The oldest messages looked harmless enough. They talked about deadlines, office gossip, and complaining about management. But as the weeks went on, the tone changed. The conversations became more personal. They started sharing inside jokes that I didn't understand. They talked about grabbing coffee after work, then dinner, then drinks. Eventually, they weren't even pretending it was work-related anymore. One email from him read, "I hate having to pretend we aren't together when he's around." My chest tightened. Her response came only a few minutes later. "Just a little longer, he's already noticing I've changed, I'll tell him soon." I had to reread that sentence 5 or 6 times because I genuinely couldn't believe the woman I loved had written it. I wasn't just reading about the end of my relationship. I was reading the timeline of when another one had secretly begun. Every loving text she'd sent me during those months suddenly became meaningless. Every kiss goodbye before work, every "I love you," every excuse about working late. She hadn't been falling out of love with me naturally. She'd been investing her love somewhere else while still coming home every night to me. That realization hurt more than anything. It wasn't that she'd eventually chosen someone else. It was that she'd made that choice long before she ever gave me the chance to know the truth. Then I found the folder that completely destroyed whatever denial I still had left. It was simply labeled Weekend. Inside were dozens of pictures, the two of them smiling in restaurants she'd told me she'd never visited. Selfies on hiking trails during weekends she'd claimed she was staying with her parents. Pictures of them holding hands, laughing, wrapped in each other's arms like two people hopelessly in love. One photo had a timestamp from the exact Saturday. I'd spent the entire afternoon assembling new shelves for our apartment because she'd texted me saying she wasn't feeling well and wanted to stay with her mom for the weekend. I remember carrying those heavy boxes upstairs by myself, thinking I was doing something nice for our future together. Meanwhile, she was making memories with someone else. I felt physically sick. 6 years, 6 entire years reduced to a collection of lies that had apparently become effortless for her. The woman I thought I knew better than anyone had somehow become a complete stranger without me noticing. I couldn't stop wondering how many times she'd kissed him and then come home to kiss me the very same day. How many nights had she laid beside me after texting him goodnight? How many anniversaries had she celebrated with me while secretly wishing she was somewhere else? Questions flooded my mind faster than I could answer them, and every answer I imagined hurt worse than the last. Then I made the mistake of opening one final conversation. It wasn't between her and him. It was between her and one of her closest friends. They were discussing how she planned to end things with me. Her friend asked if I suspected anything and my ex replied, "No, he's too trusting, that's what makes this so hard." Her friend suggested she simply tell me she'd lost feelings because it's kinder than admitting you emotionally checked out months ago. My ex responded with a single sentence that I'll probably remember for the rest of my life. "I just don't want him to hate me." I leaned back in the chair and laughed. Not because anything was funny, but because it was the only thing stopping me from breaking down completely. She didn't want me to hate her. Yet she'd spent months building a relationship with another man while letting me believe we were still planning a future together. She had stolen months of my life that I could have spent healing. She had looked me directly in the eyes and sworn there wasn't anyone else. It wasn't the cheating alone that shattered me. It was the calculated way she'd rewritten reality, making me question my own instincts while she quietly prepared her exit. As I slowly closed the laptop, the apartment felt eerily silent. The boxes around me no longer looked like the remains of a shared life. They looked like evidence from a crime scene. I glanced around the living room where we'd celebrated birthdays, watched movies, argued over paint colors, and dreamed about buying a house one day. Suddenly, none of it felt real anymore. Every memory now carried a question mark. I realized that by the time she'd said she'd lost feelings, she'd already been living an entirely different life. I heard the front door unlock. She was home, and she had absolutely no idea that I knew everything. Sound of her keys hitting the kitchen counter echoed through the apartment, and for a brief second I wondered if I should pretend nothing had happened. Maybe I should quietly finish packing, leave before sunrise, and never speak to her again. Part of me wanted to disappear without giving her the satisfaction of seeing how badly she'd broken me. But another part of me, the part that had spent 6 years loving her without hesitation, felt like I deserved at least one thing before I walked away forever. I deserved the truth, even if she had no intention of giving it willingly. She walked into the living room carrying a takeout bag and smiled the same polite smile she'd been wearing all week. "Hey," she said casually. "I brought you something to eat. I figured you probably hadn't had dinner yet." It was such a normal sentence, spoken so naturally that for a split second I almost forgot everything I'd just seen. But then I remembered the hotel reservation, the emails, the pictures and the messages to her friend. I remembered every lie hidden behind that calm expression. I looked at the bag in her hands and realized how strange it was that someone could betray another person so completely and still remember to buy them dinner on the way home. Without saying a word, I slowly turned her laptop around so the screen faced her. I had left one of the emails open, the one where she told her coworker, "Just a little longer, I'll tell him soon." The moment her eyes landed on the screen, every ounce of color disappeared from her face. She froze, her mouth opened slightly but nothing came out. For the first time in months she looked genuinely surprised. The silence between us felt unbearable. Neither of us moved, neither of us spoke. It was as if the apartment itself had stopped breathing. Finally she whispered, "You weren't supposed to see that." Those 6 words hurt more than any apology ever could. Not "I'm sorry," not "I made a terrible mistake." Her first reaction wasn't remorse, it was disappointment that she'd been caught. I stared at her, waiting for her to say something that would make any of it make sense. Instead, tears filled her eyes as she sat down on the couch. She admitted the emotional affair had started months earlier. She insisted nothing physical happened at first, but eventually she realized she had fallen for him. She claimed she didn't know how to tell me because she was terrified of hurting me. Every explanation sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing them in her head for weeks. I asked her one question that had been eating away at me ever since I opened the laptop. "When exactly did you stop loving me?" She looked down at the floor for a long time before answering. "I don't know," she said quietly. "It just happened," but I knew that wasn't true. Love doesn't simply disappear while hotel reservations magically appear. Feelings don't accidentally turn into secret weekends away, hidden photos and private conversations about how to leave someone. This wasn't something that just happened. It was a series of choices, hundreds of them, every text she sent him, every lie she told me, every excuse, every decision to come home and pretend everything was normal. None of that was an accident. Then she started crying harder than I'd ever seen before. She told me she never wanted to become the bad guy. She said she'd convinced herself that if she ended things peacefully and blamed it on losing feelings, we'd both eventually move on without unnecessary pain. I couldn't help but laugh through my own tears. "You didn't avoid hurting me," I told her. "You just delayed it until it became 1,000 times worse." She covered her face with her hands because I think, for the first time, she finally understood what she'd actually done. She hadn't just ended a relationship. She had destroyed the foundation of trust we'd spent 6 years building together. I picked up the last box containing my belongings and carried it toward the front door. She followed me, begging me not to leave angry. She said she hoped one day we could still be friends because despite everything, I was still an important person in her life. I turned around one final time and looked at the woman I once imagined marrying. "Friends don't lie to each other for months," I said calmly. "Friends don't watch someone plan a future while secretly planning an escape." She started crying even harder, but I couldn't comfort her anymore. That version of me had died the moment I opened her laptop. As I loaded the final box into my car, I looked back at the apartment one last time. It no longer felt like home. It was just a building filled with memories that belonged to a version of my life that no longer existed. I drove away without knowing where I was going. I just knew I couldn't stay there another second. The drive was quiet, and for the first time in days I allowed myself to cry without holding anything back. Not because I wanted her back, but because I was mourning the future I thought we were building together. It's been almost 2 years since that night. Therapy helped, time helped. My family and friends reminded me that someone else's betrayal isn't a reflection of my worth. Looking back now, I don't hate her anymore. Hatred is exhausting, and eventually I realized she had to live with the consequences of her own choices. As for me, I learned something I never expected. Sometimes the truth that completely breaks you is also the truth that sets you free. If I had never opened that laptop, I might have spent years blaming myself for not being enough. Instead, I walked away knowing I wasn't abandoned because I lacked value. I was abandoned because someone else lacked honesty. Today, I'm happier than I ever imagined possible. I eventually met someone who communicates instead of hiding things, someone who believes loyalty isn't just a promise but a daily choice. The scars from those 6 years haven't completely disappeared, and maybe they never will, but they remind me to value honesty above comfort, truth above excuses, and self-respect above clinging to people who have already let go. Losing the relationship I thought would last forever turned out to be the beginning of finding the life I actually deserved. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment for more crazy confessions I get from people.